What is up, guys? My name is Josh. Welcome back to another video. In this video we're going to be talking about cards that need a buff. I haven't talked about cards that need a buff in a while now, and I feel like in the time that I haven't talked about cards that need a buff, I feel like a lot of cards have kind of crept up and they need a buff, well, at least in my mind. And so I want to jump in straight away and say that I think the graveyard needs a buff. I think with poison so strong in the meta right now, it's so prevalent, it's everywhere, you know, everyone's using it essentially. And we all know my thoughts and opinions on the poison. I still think it needs a nerf. Hopefully in this next balance changes, the poison will catch a nerf. Yeah, but as far as buffs go, I think the graveyard should get one just in the meantime. I think that regardless of just the poison, I think it's still so counterable. It's still so so easily counterable for way less elixir. You know, it costs 5 to put down on the map, and you can pretty much counter it with 2 elixir, 3 elixir, 4 elixir every time consistently, no problem. And then the thing is, let's just throw out a few scenarios. Let's say the other person uses archers. You know, that requires you to use a fireball. So not only have you spent 5 on the graveyard, and probably the ice golem that you've paired it with, because you don't just put a lone graveyard down. So that's 7 elixir to begin with. And then if they play archers for 3 elixir, that will literally defend the whole graveyard. So then you have to play a fireball, which then brings the total up to 11 elixir, and they've only spent 3. So you're 8 down, and it's just every time you kind of use a graveyard or go in, there's always kind of a negative trade, especially if they use poison, you know, because poison costs 1 less than the graveyard. It counters it perfectly every time. And yeah, it costs 1 less, so they can just put it down on defense, takes the whole graveyard out, and they've saved 3 elixir because you've obviously played an ice golem and then that 1 extra elixir for the graveyard. So every single time the opponent will make a 3 elixir positive trade on the graveyard. And it can be a lot worse, as I said, like if the other person uses archers, minions, you know, even goblins, you know, how can you get rid of them without, you need a log or a fireball, you know. And when I play graveyard, most of the time I play poison myself, just in case of minion hordes and stuff like that, and a lot of 3 muskies around right now. But I just think the problem is that it's too easily countered. You know, it used to be really, really strong when it first came out, and then I think they reduced it by 2 seconds, and they made the radius smaller, which was a really, really big nerf in my opinion. I'm not saying the graveyard isn't a good card. It's still a good card, and you can still use it definitely, and it still works. Don't get me wrong, but I just feel like with the amount of poison there is right now, it's a little bit impossible to be successful with graveyard. Yeah, you can win with it, but there's a difference between winning and being successful with it. And what I mean by being successful with it is, you know, getting 12 win grand challenges consistently, playing well on the ladder, and you know, being super high in trophies. But you just don't see that with the graveyard, because you can't, almost, because there's too much poison. And yeah, like I said, I think I've already talked about this in my poison video. I thought that the perfect solution would be to nerf the poison, because then you wouldn't have to touch the graveyard. Because I think the graveyard's strong enough as it is, right? But the problem is the poison, and that's all it is. So if you nerf the poison, you don't have to buff the graveyard. But I guess they either didn't see my video, or they don't listen to the community, because a lot of other people want the poison to be nerfed as well. You know, if you look at the usage rates alone, it's just insane. It must be in the high 80%. But I digress. I think that, yeah, in terms of graveyard, I think it's quite an easy fix as to what they could do, in my opinion. I just think you could kind of give it a nerf and a buff in the same run, I guess. You know, because the problem with poison is that it's the same duration as the graveyard. So as soon as someone plays the graveyard, you play the poison on top to defend, and both of them will go at the same time because they're the same duration. So I think that for the graveyard, they could just slightly increase the duration, whether it be by 1 second whether it be by 2 seconds, 3 seconds, 4 seconds, I don't know, but increase the duration of the graveyard, and then depending on how strong it is in testing, reduce some of the skeletons. I'm sure there's other things you could do with the graveyard. I'm sure there's multiple ways you could look at buffing it and look at different ideas of what you could do with the card. You know, some people might say just increase the radius to what it used to be, but actually the radius is better now than it used to be because it's more consistent with its skeletons. You know, there's less King Tower activations actually, but yeah, so there's a lot of different ways you could approach the card, but I personally like the longer duration way because you don't, it makes them not have to nerf the poison, and then it makes also the graveyard stronger because it's around for longer. But then to counter the fact that it's around for longer, maybe just reduce the skeletons by 1, you know, just take 1 skeleton away, or increase it by 2 seconds, and then increase instead of increasing the skeletons by 2, because it would be 1 skeleton per second, right? That's how it is right now. So increase it by 2 seconds, but only put 1 skeleton in. So it's longer, so it outlasts the poison, and then it has that 1 extra skeleton to do just a tiny little bit more damage. And I really think that would make all the difference with the graveyard, because most people who play graveyard cycle, right? Anywhere from 2.9 to 3.3. That's what a lot of people. That's how a lot of people play graveyard, including myself. That's how I got my personal best on the ladder. I had a 2.9 graveyard deck. It was the Knight, Musketeers, Archers, Ice Spirit, 1 Elixir Skeletons, Graveyard, and I think I had Poison. No, I had Fireball and Log. And it cost 2.9, and it got me to my personal best, 5,529, I think, or something like that, 5,500 and something. And yeah, I just think from going from a card that was so strong as it was back in the day when it was first released to what it is now, it's not, like I said again, it's not a bad card, but it's too easily countered by everything. You know, there's too many cards that counter it. And then of course you've got the consistent card that counters it every time, being the poison. So I think, you know, obviously they could either do 2 things. They could nerf the poison like I said they should have done a long time ago, and I still think that they should do that, so then other spells can come in the meta. Or they just buff the graveyard, which I think makes sense because there are so many cards that counter it right now. Plus, you know, playing the graveyard, like I said earlier, every time it's a negative elixir trade for you. You know, if the person has archers or minions or anything like that, they can always counter the graveyard for less elixir than it costs them. And I think that's one of the big problems with the graveyard. I'm not too sure in terms of like if they would actually buff it, because I'm sure the win rates are fine. I haven't actually looked, but I'm pretty sure from my experience in the grand challenges and from friendly matches and from people in my clan and from what they've said, from my experiences, I feel like they don't have a problem with the graveyard. They don't see it. They don't see the poison as a problem. But if you actually look at it, if you actually break it down, the poison fully counters the graveyard every single time for 1 less elixir. So you either have 2 options with that scenario. You nerf one of the cards, being the poison, or you buff the other. You do one of the 2. So this is kind of a joint buff nerf video, in the way that they either need to buff the graveyard and leave the poison where it is, or they need to buff the poison and leave the graveyard where it is. Nerf the poison, sorry. Could you imagine if they buffed it? It would be insane. Back in the day of poison golem, not golem, giant, Goizen, that meta was insane. And oh, you could get, I could talk about this all day, but giant poison's super strong in the meta right now still, and it's been a year and a half since it was really strong. I'll talk about that in another video because it's kind of insane to me. But yeah, to sum up, I just think that they could increase the duration of the graveyard, or they could make it so that it spawns more skeletons. But even then, the poison would still counter it. So I think the only solution would be to would be to increase the duration, because then it outlasts the poison, and then you've got those few extra skeletons that will spawn in after, and that's the only solution for me. I don't really see another one. If there is, be sure to let me know in the comments down below, guys. Give the video a thumbs up as always, and I'll see you in the next video. Peace out.